All right, how's everybody doing? If I talk fast, it's a mix of caffeine and nervousness. But Pastor Eileen just gave me some words of encouragement, so I think we're going to make it all right. All right, so real quick, I want to start off with a story, okay? Juan, you're going to appreciate this, okay? So it's going to tie into what I'm going to talk about tonight as well. All right, so when I was 6 years old, my sisters are watching from Florida and Chattanooga, Tennessee. I love y'all. But when I was 6 years old, I had no doubt at all about what I wanted to do when I got older. I was 100% convinced I was going to be a cavalry officer in the United States Army. You couldn't tell me otherwise. And some of y'all younger ones won't remember this, but in the 90s, the Army used to say, be all that you can be. And I would walk around with a gap tooth and a nappy head, and I was like, be all that you can be. I'm going to join the Army. And I watched all the movies. She wore a yellow ribbon, seeing the cavalry officers riding across the plains, shooting it out and stuff. That just fascinated me. And I knew that one day I was going to be a cavalry officer. Fast forward 15 years later, I found myself in Fort Lewis, Washington. Fort Lewis, looking at Mount Rainier, walking through the forest, completely lost. And the reason I was lost is because as a young soldier, and even up into becoming a captain, I've always struggled with land navigation. Now, senior NCOs like Juan over here that's laughing, they understand this thing that they always tease us young lieutenants about. You can't spell lost without LT. And when I tell you guys I was lost, I mean I was utterly, completely lost. How many of y'all have ever been to Washington State before? Or seen Mount Rainier? Do you know what it looks like around Mount Rainier? Evergreen trees. Extremely tall, looks like Jurassic Park. So I'm walking and I'm daydreaming and I'm like, man, I see myself graduating, my parents pinning on my bars, me being an officer and just doing great things in the United States military. But then at the same time, I still got to find 5 points at night and I got to find 8 points in the day. Now, to give y'all a little more of an understanding of land nav, and I know Dusty and his sister have done it several times, but to give you an understanding, for those of you that don't understand how land nav works, you have to find at least 6 to 8 points. 6 out of 8 to pass in a day, 4 out of 5 to pass in the night. So me being not very good at land nav, I'm like, oh my goodness, I got to devise a plan. The points are typically about sometimes 2 miles, nothing too long, but all you have is a map and a compass, and the map's about 15 to 20 years out of date. So I'm looking at my map, and I'm like, okay, I'm formulating my plan, and I'm like, hey, I think I'm going to go ahead and day land nav, I'm cool, okay? I'm not worried. Day land nav's cool, but nighttime, I already can't see very good. Pastor Jeff would never ride with me at nighttime again. That's what he told me. He said he'll drive. That's the only way he's going to do it. So I'm looking at my map, and I'm like, oh, man, this point's like about a mile out, and it's pitch black, and I have a red flashlight. If you use a white flashlight, they'll completely kick you out. So I have a red flashlight, and I'm plotting it out. And because we're cadets, right, for safety purposes, they let us go out when it's still kind of like it is outside, a little bit light. So it's technically not night yet, okay? Y'all keep tracking with me, okay? So I formulate my plan, and I'm like, hey, if I go to the farthest point first, I can get to the farthest point before dark. And the good idea fairies start going off. Then I'll come back and get the closer ones that are off the road when it gets dark. And I thought this was the perfect plan. So Cadet Littlejohn takes off, and he goes into the forest of Mount Rainier. And all of a sudden, about 2 hours in, I'm looking around, and I'm bum lost. Pitch black. I have a red flashlight. Remember, if you turn the white one on, they will kick you out. It's not a joke. Why? They'll send you home. They will send you home. So I'm like, oh, my goodness, what am I going to do? I smelled the bear. I literally smelled a bear. If you want to know what a bear smells like, put 3 to 10 of the dirtiest dogs together in one cage for about 3 weeks without a bath, and you will know what a bear smells like. So I'm extremely nervous, and I'm like, oh, my goodness. At that point, I realized my plan wasn't working because I was 2 hours in, I had 2 hours left, and I had found no points. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to do something. So I'm like, let me turn around, and I'm going to go back to the road where the points are the closest. So I go back, and I start building my confidence. And y'all are going to see where I'm going. I start building my confidence and getting the little points and getting the little points. And then when I have some time left, I go back and I get the furthest point. It's the fourth point. Now, I have to confess something, okay? Don't judge me. I didn't find that on my own, okay? I did not find the fourth point on my own. So we kind of have the hook a brother up thing. So I talked about the maps being outdated. So the cadets kind of give each other a little bit of sympathy, okay? So the points are kind of like street signs. So when I got close to it, I couldn't find it. And I'm looking at my map. I'm like, I know this is it. I have a dream to be a cavalry officer. I've been dreaming of this since I was 6, and I'm finding this point. Next thing you know it, I look to my left. There's red flashlights going everywhere like this, and you can see cadets. And I'm like, yes! And then I still couldn't find the point because I can't see very good at night. So then somebody took a flashlight and went boom, 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 and hit it on the man, and I took off racing towards that point, and I got that bad boy, and I headed back, and I passed Land Nav, and I left LDAC, and I became an officer in the Army. Thank you. All right, and you're like, Justin, what does that have to do? Why are you telling us this story? Because I realized when Pastor Jeff and Pastor Eileen tapped my jersey to give the message in this awesome Hero series. How many of y'all been joining the Hero series this summer? It's been an awesome series. So when they tapped my number, they called my number, I said, man, you know, there's someone in the Bible that's a hero of faith who stayed lost, kind of like me. There's a lot of things I did right in the military. I did a lot of things good, Juan, but I stayed lost, man. Land nav just didn't come natural for me, man. It didn't come natural for me. Map reading was not my thing. And when I was thinking about it, I was like, man, you know what? Abraham was kind of like I was, man. He was a guy that was given a promise, right? He was given a promise, and he had a dream, and his dream was to have a son. And the Lord came to him, and our master text is going to be Hebrews chapter 11, 8 through 13. So if you want to turn there, I'm going to read straight from the text here. And tonight, by the way, the title of tonight's lesson is Life Lessons from Abraham, one of the awesomest heroes of faith. I made that word up, but I'm sticking with it. Awesomest heroes of faith you'll ever see. All right, so we're reading from Hebrews chapter 11, 8 through 13. It says, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called out to the place which he received as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. But by faith, he dwelt in the land of promise as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, their heirs with him on the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. By faith, Sarah also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Therefore, one man, and him as good as dead, were born as many of the stars in the sky, innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. And I got to thinking, I'm like, okay, so Abraham was a wanderer. The patriarchs are our early founding fathers of biblical civilization. So me and him kind of have something in common. So maybe I can take some of the lessons that Abraham learned from being lost, because if you read Genesis chapter 12 through 25, you'll see he made a living off of being lost, literally. And we're going to talk about that tonight. And we're going to talk about what you have to do, even in your lost moments, even when you can't navigate every point efficiently, what you have to do to stay on course and receive and inherit the promises of God. So my first point is, in order to obtain the full benefits of the covenant, first you have to be willing to move, and then you have to actually do it. So if you turn with me, or you can just listen to Genesis 12, 1 and 2, you'll see that this is where the Lord first gives the initial promise to Abraham. And he says, now the Lord has said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who curse you, and I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. And in you, all families of the earth shall be blessed. So that was the initial promise that Abraham received from God. And you have to understand the context of the way Abraham lived. He was a sojourner. He was a wanderer. He was a tent dweller. And the Lord came to him and gave him this magnificent promise that I'm going to increase you, and I'm going to multiply you, and I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to make you a father of many nations. Now, the first step to that, though, like, that sounds great. And I think a lot of times we've gotten words. I know many of us have gotten words from when we were little in our home churches when people come to town, and it feels great, but that word won't make your feet move. You have to make a decision to make your feet move. So God spoke to Abraham, and he said, hey, I'm going to give this to you, and I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to make your descendants numerous, and as numerous as the stars. But first, you got to do something first. You got to beat sand, man. You got to start moving. You got to go into the land first. See, a lot of times, people try to put descendants, or you want to put families on something that has no foundation. Land represents the foundation. So in order for Abraham to get what God promised him in the stars, you got to beat sand and conquer the land. And no America without the United States. And a lot of times we want the nation, but we don't want to lead the revolution. So there's so many people that we run around and we're just like chasing words, when really the word is going to manifest even more when you start to move. And as we continue reading about Abraham's life, you're going to see that everywhere he moved, and even in his mistakes and his mess ups, he kept multiplying. And it doesn't make sense to our natural mind, but movement is powerful, because when you're moving, friction happens, and when you're moving, energy takes place. And the supernatural power of the Holy Spirit and God's grace hooked up with your willingness to move is what's going to make the word come to pass in your life. So the first promise to Abraham was land. The next promise was descendants. Not descendants, then land, then descendants. So the land was the immediate conquest. Yet in his life, Abraham focused much more on his son and the descendants. And that's what we do sometimes. Just like me and my example in Fort Lewis, I wanted to try to, in my own infallibility, I wanted to try to go to the farthest thing first, because I thought for sure that would get me to my goal. Going to the farthest point, designing my own strategy, designing my own method to get my lifelong dream. When in reality, I wasn't good at land nav in the first place. And there's a lot of people, we haven't really, like Pastor Jeff says, we're saved and everything, but there's still a process of sanctification. And there's a lot of things we don't have figured out because we're still in our process of discipleship, but we want to go chase after like Stephen Furtick or be like somebody else, when what we really need to be doing is sitting at the feet of Jesus, sitting under good teaching, sitting under positive people, and being discipled. So then you're not trying to skip to the farthest point to get done before dark. You're walking and navigating through things, and you're taking it at your level. And that's how you keep your shooting star. You're going to shoot out far, and eventually you're just going to fall on your face, because going to those points, little point by point, teaches you something, and you learn something, which takes me to my next point. Brace for impact in Egypt, okay? Brace for impact in Egypt. So in Abraham's life, and you can read about this, it's one of the first major things that happened on his journey. And that's how he ended up in Egypt. There was a famine in the land, and it wasn't anything Abraham did. And you're going to learn something about Egypt in life, and I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. But Egypt in life, you don't always get a say in it. Some people create their own Egypt, but some people are literally just going around, they're living life, enjoying life, and bam, cancer diagnosis. Bam, death in the family. Bam, something just is going wrong. And you'll see that in Abraham's life, he journeyed to Egypt because there was famine. Now, when he got to Egypt, that's key, because this is the key point that I want you to take away. Egypt is coming to you. I wish I could tell you it wasn't coming, but the Bible says no man's exempt from the evil day. The evil day is coming. Egypt is coming for you. And Egypt is a place where we'll all journey. However, it will be different for each of us. In Egypt, we are talked about. We are lied on. We are misunderstood. We are misrepresented. Egypt's sole purpose is to take something intimate from you. It's to take your relationships. It's to take your loved ones. It's to just to discombobulate you and dishearten you. That's the goal of Egypt. So you'll see in Scripture, when Abraham ends up in Egypt, he gets miscombobulated because Pharaoh saw Sarah. And I don't know if y'all noticed this, but if you read Genesis chapter 12 to 25, you're going to find out something real quick. Sarah was fly, okay? Because everybody, wherever Abraham went, was trying to holler at Sarah. So getting back to the story, it was a famine in the land. Everybody was starving. Everyone was hungry. So Abraham said, look, man, we got to go to Egypt because, they're making some banana pudding. Ricky's mom's banana pudding's down there, and that's where we got to go. We're going to go down to Egypt. We're going to get this banana pudding. So Abraham rose up, man. He's got his team with him. He's got Sarah with him. And Pharaoh walks out, man. And Pharaoh's boys see Sarah, and they're like, boy, she fly. And then Abraham's scared. He's like, oh, my goodness, they're going to kill me. They're going to kill me. They want Sarah. They want Sarah. All right, so this is what I'm going to do. Kind of like I did in my example. I made up my own little strategy. So Abraham, in his infallibility, made up his little strategy. And he said, guess what? I'm going to tell them Sarah's my sister. I'm going to tell them Sarah's my sister, because if not, they're probably going to kill me. That's how I know Sarah was fly. Because if they're going to kill you for her, man, she's got to be pretty good looking. They ain't just killing nobody for anybody. So Sarah gets down there. Everybody's beautiful, by the way. I just want to point that out. Everybody's beautiful. But anyway, so Sarah is taken back, right? So Pharaoh grabs her and he takes her back to his chambers. And right then, God's like, wait a second. Hold on, wait a second. Okay, Abraham's about to mess up. So I have a covenant with this guy, and I kind of promised him a son from a pure bloodline, okay? And from him is going to be my nation, and from him all nations will be blessed. That promise wasn't for Pharaoh's boy. That promise was for Abraham's boy. So let me tell you something, Pharaoh. If you touch her, I'm killing you. You're dead. So Pharaoh runs out, and he's like, oh my goodness, why didn't you tell me that Sarah was your wife? He's like, I could have died. Why didn't you tell me? And Abraham's probably like this. The Bible doesn't say this, by the way, but Abraham probably, he probably just kind of laughed at him. Look, he was probably sweating. He was probably nervous because he already knew the promise. He knew that his son was going to be the link, for lack of better terms, the link to his lineage. So he knew he had messed up the minute he passed Sarah as his sister. But I'm here to tell you tonight that God is still faithful even when you're in Egypt, even when you make stupid decisions, because Egypt wants to spark fear in you. Egypt wants to dishearten you. Egypt wants to make you feel like giving up. Egypt wants to blind you from the promise. But even when you make the not so smart decisions in Egypt, guess what? God was faithful to the covenant. He had a covenant with Abraham. And in the New Testament, the Bible says he'll rebuke the devourer for your name's sake, right? He'll rebuke the devourer for you. That's a new covenant benefit. And we watch Abraham, through his covenant with God, access New Testament benefits, like Pastor Eileen and we're preaching, access the buffet in the Old Testament. And it's because the power of the covenant. So a lot of times we're going through Egypt, and Egypt is extremely dry, and Egypt's extremely rough, and it's disheartening, and you're sweating, and you're starving, and you're having to compromise in some areas. You feel like you have to compromise to eat. You feel like you have to compromise to be blessed. But I'm here to tell you tonight that in the midst of Egypt, God can still bless you and rebuke the devourer and rebuke the Pharaoh in your life, and you don't have to give up yourself to Pharaoh in order to eat. So there's two ways you get out of Egypt before I move to my next point. There's two ways, and you'll see throughout the Bible, even with Abraham's great-grandson, you'll see there's two ways to get out of Egypt. And here's the two ways to get out of Egypt. God's faithfulness to his covenant, meaning you did nothing, just like in Abraham's case. You just didn't do anything any more stupider than what Abraham did. And God came there and just immediately, supernaturally interrupted Pharaoh's plans. And he came in because of the covenant. The second way you get out of Egypt is the way you conduct yourself in Egypt. You see, I said that Egypt is where you're misunderstood, it's where you're lied on, it's where you're mistreated, and it's where you talk about. It's where you're talked about. It's just a nasty place, okay? It's a place of nastiness. It's a place that's meant to keep you there in slavery and in bondage. It'll give you a couple of meals every now and then, but it's meant to keep you there in bondage. Now, the way you conduct yourselves determines the manner of which you leave Egypt. But one of those 2 points that I just gave you is what's going to bring you out. And in Abraham's case, it was God's faithfulness to his covenant with Abraham. And guess how Abraham left Egypt? With gold, silver, camels, horses, probably some spices, who knows, man? But he left loaded. So this wandering tent dweller went to Egypt by no circumstances of his own and left out of Egypt rich, even in the midst of his mistakes. How does that work? Covenant. And I'm telling y'all tonight, before I move to my next point, some of you guys, because you maybe not have everything figured out in Christianity, and you gotten in Egypt and you made decisions based off fear, but because of God's faithfulness, not because of your works or anything else, but because of God's faithfulness to the covenant, You're coming out of Egypt tonight, and you're coming out loaded. You're coming out rich. You're coming out blessed and prosperous. All right. So after Egypt, he came out loaded, he came out rich, he came out blessed, and he came out prosperous. But guess what? When you get money, people start coming out of the woodworks, man. So next thing you know, he comes. Abraham's coming out. He's balling now. He's balling, young people. And he's coming out, and his nephew Lot's balling too now because Lot's under the covenant, man. That's how it works. That's exactly how it works. So Lot's balling too. So now Lot's feeling himself, like any young person would. Lot's feeling himself. He's like, okay, I got my work in. All right. So Lot becomes kind of a problem, man. Lot's kind of immature at times, and he kind of messy at times. So the race is tough enough, okay? The race is tough enough for Abraham. You got to think, man, this man was a wandering tent dweller who just left a famine, who just left Egypt after a famine, and now Lot's acting up, okay? But let me tell you something. The third point is, in order to move on with the promises of God and inherit the promise of God on your life like Abraham did, is to set aside some of the heavy weights, man. And there came a point where Lot became a heavy weight. So you'll read in Genesis chapter 13 where he said, look, Lot, this is the way this is going to work, man. I love you, dude. But so that there will be peace among us. If you pick the left, I'll go right. And if you pick the right, I'll go left. But I'll always love you, man. But the promise of God is calling me. And I got to keep on walking. Because in order to get the promise in the stars, I got to beat some sand, dude. And it doesn't seem like you're really on track with this, man. So I love you, man, and I'm praying for you, but I got to go, man. So you pick the left, I'm going right. If you pick the right, I'm going left. And Lot, being the young person that he was, he said, okay, boy, that grass is green over there. That's St. Augustine? Oh, yeah, that's green. And I'm a big fan of St. Augustine, so I'm kind of wondering what I would have done in that situation. But, no, I'm just kidding. But so Lot ends up pitching his tent towards the lights because he could see the lights of Sodom. And Abraham, good old Abraham, he ended up taking the opposite way, which didn't look as green, which didn't look as beautiful, didn't have the city lights in the background, and ended up in Canaan. But guess what? Canaan was part of the promise. If you read, you'll see that that land was part of the promise. So sometimes the lights and the great plains and the lushness of the plain is more of a distractor. It's an eye candy. And you'll see that many Lots in your life, they're going to go for the eye candy. They're going to move towards the eye candy, and you just got to let them move out. You got to let them go. And you got to keep away from Sodom. You got to keep away from what looks greener to remain in the promise. And I'm telling you, when you're able to set aside the heavy weights and you're able to set aside the stuff that's causing mess and drama and strife and turmoil in your life, you're going to find yourself remaining on the track to the promise that God has for you. Because the ability to efficiently attain the promise of God typically requires clarity and focus. So lots exist to take your clarity and lots exist to take your focus. And because Abraham was purposed, not perfect as we read, he was purposed, he was able to say, hey, look, dude, he had to make a mature decision. And you're going to see if you read, and I'm not really going to touch on it tonight, but you're going to see that Abraham still loved him and he interceded for him. And because Lot was still under the covenant, the angels went and ministered to Lot and took him out of there to keep him from destruction. That's not part of the message, but praise God for that anyway. All right. The next point is that you have to learn the principles of faith and patience. So in Genesis chapter 16 now, you have Sarah. She's like, look, I'm frustrated. God, you promised me a son. You promised me a son, and you promised my husband that we would have a son, and that from that son, we would have multitudes of nations, that we would be blessed, that we would just be a great nation. And I can't even have a son, and I'm getting old, and I'm getting wrinkly, and I kind of don't really see how this is going to work. And I'm pretty sure at that moment she felt a lot closer to death than she felt to the promise. Anybody ever been there? Felt a lot closer to death than you do to the promise. And you feel like your dreams are dying, but you're trying to hold on as long as you can. You're trying to hold on as long as you can. But at her weakest moment, and you'll read this in Genesis chapter 16, in her weakest moment, Hagar gave in and she persuaded Abraham to take Hagar. By the way, for those of you who are a little, like maybe don't know too much about it, I'm going to explain Hagar. So when, back in the Bible days, there was and in some countries still going on, when someone couldn't have a kid, they had what you call a concubine. So I want to just point out real quick, Sarah was the promise, okay? Sarah was Abraham's wife. That's where the promised child was coming from. Hagar was a concubine, okay? Young people, she was a side chick. So, and so I just lost track. But anyway, Hagar was the side chick. She was a side girl, okay? Sarah was the promise. But here's the thing. When you get impatient sometimes when you get impatient, you end up with the side girl instead of the beautiful thing that the Lord has for you, the fine thing. So I would end up with something else. Instead of a fine Jamie, I would have ended up with something completely different. And in this case, Sarah gets impatient because she's looking at her skin every day, and the creams and the potions and the powders are not working anymore. And she's like, look, we got to do something right now so we can have this son, even if it's not mine. So let's bring in Hagar. Now, let me tell y'all something about Hagar. The Hagars in our life exist to appease the impatience and lack of faith which creep in during our weakest moments. Hagars exist to take your eyes off the promise of God and to allocate your blessings to something in which God did not mean for it to go. You see what I'm saying? So Hagars exist literally to try to switch the hand of the blessing. But the blessing wasn't supposed to go to Hagar's son. The blessing was supposed to go to Abraham and Sarah's son, not to the side chick, to the main chick, okay? So what is God? What are you saying? I'm saying this. I'm saying God's will for your life is to give you the main chick, not the side chick, the main entree, not the fries. You get to get the nuggets, kids. Are there any kids in here? You're going to get the nuggets, okay? And there's a lot of times where we get impatient because the nuggets might take a little longer than the fries, okay? So we want to toss out the nuggets, but you can't live off fries. You got to have some nuggets, okay? Okay? Just for the kids in here. Now there's more. Okay? It is in these moments, okay, when if you fail to remain in faith and you give in, okay? If you give in and you fail to remain in faith, that's where you meet Ishmael, okay? That's where you meet Ishmael. Ishmael is the fruit of your relationship with Hagar. Ishmael is the fruit of your relationship with Hagar. Every decision we make outside of God's will is an Ishmael. I can tell you right now, I made a lot of Ishmaels. I could have an orphanage of Ishmaels. But I'm going to tell you something. In order to obtain the covenant benefits, we must learn that Hagars are not options. Hagar cannot be an option. You can't choose between two girls in this situation. It's covenant or not covenant. It's buffet or famine. You see, Ishmael might have been a nation, but he's still not the covenant nation. I'll keep moving. All right. The sixth and last point that I have for you guys tonight is to have more faith in the covenant than in your mistakes. And I'm going to elaborate a little bit. So I talked about in my life, I've made a lot of Ishmaels in my life. I'm telling y'all, a lot of Ishmaels. And sometimes in life, the Ishmaels don't always get to go away, okay? Can I be real, okay? There might be some people that have babies out of wedlock, okay? And then the family has issues, okay? So you can't get along with the family. And it's just a big mess. And you're like, oh, my gosh, I wish I would have never gotten the sack with Hagar. Or you might have had a marriage, right? You might have a marriage, and you might have been previously married, and the marriage didn't work out how you wanted to. And now maybe someone's causing mess in between you and the kids, and you're just like, oh, my goodness. And these Ishmaels just keep on coming back to haunt you and haunt you and haunt you. But I'm telling you right now, and this blew my mind. I talked to Tyler yesterday. We were out, and I talked to Tyler, and I said, hey, Tyler, I want to ask you something before you leave. I said, why do you think God blessed Ishmael? Because if you read in the Bible, it's literally almost still throws me off. I'm serious. I said, why do you think God blessed Ishmael? Everybody knows, to give you all a little background, Perry Stone's going to do a way better job of doing it on the 24th to the 26th. But Ishmael's descendants, okay? Ishmael's descendants are still warring with Abraham's descendants today. Okay? So I'm thinking about this as I'm reading, and I was like, why? Because it's a feud. And I'm like, why did you bless Ishmael? Why did you make Ishmael a great nation of 12 kings? Why? When you knew, surely God that created the universe, you knew that he was going to war against your people. And guess what? He said, because my covenant is not made conditional upon your mistakes. When you're in covenant with me, I'll still bless your Ishmael. That's why you can find divorced people and they're still in great relationship. That's why you can find broken homes and you can find broken kids and broken relationships. And it might seem really ruddy, but then all of a sudden they have an immediate turnaround. And there's immediate turnaround from your decisions. There's mothers, and I know them, they're my friends. There's people that have made horrible decisions in their early 20s, and their kids are not really doing that great. But then they get here, and they hook up with the one-year challenge, and they find out about covenant, and they find out about the buffet Pastor Jeff and Pastor Eileen were preaching about, and they begin the path of discipleship, and they get around positive people who are speaking into their lives and are building them up. And then all of a sudden, they realize something. Man, life's getting a whole lot better. And it's not because of their performance. It's not because of their works. It's all because even under the covenant, God can still bless Ishmael. He can still bless those decisions, the mistakes that you've made, and he can turn them around for the good of those that are called according to his purpose. And one more thing I want to add, and I kind of missed it. I want to touch on something. I'm going to go back to this. Just to kind of accelerate it through, y'all know, Sarah ends up getting pregnant, but before she was pregnant, there were some messengers that came to her, okay? There were some messengers that came. One was the Lord and one was two angels. The other were two angels. And these messengers basically stated, hey, by the time the cycle of life comes back around, next time we come back around, you'll have a son. Now, it still took several years from the time they said this, but I'm going to tell you something. This is what I really want you to take away tonight, okay? These messengers in Genesis chapter 18 are vital to your life and are vital to you when you're discouraged because you're human. We're flesh. We're human. And there's going to be times when we're beat down. There's going to be times where we're discouraged and we feel let down and we feel like the promise is so far away and that we're never going to obtain it. But I want to tell you something. There's two people that you're going to find in your life, okay? One group is lots, people that cause mess, drama, turmoil, and their other is what you'll read in Genesis chapter 18. It's messengers. It's messengers that remind you of the promise of God when Sarah's looking at her wrinkled self and she's like, how am I going to have a child? How am I going to bring life out of this body? I'm all dried up. I'm all wrinkly, and I'm about half dead. And this messenger is still telling her, hey, by this next time I come around, I'm reminding you the promise of God. Every time I see you, those messengers were just telling her, hey, there is life in you. I don't care what you look like. I don't care how dry you are. I don't care how white your hair gets. You will have a child. The truth and the promises of God will come to pass in your life. So I want to encourage you tonight to be around the right messengers. Throw the lots to the side, cast the lots to the side, and get around the right people who are going to speak the promises of God in your life in the moments you feel like giving up, in your darkest moments, in your Egypts, in your famines. Find the people that are going to speak into your life and to prepare you for it. And